Thank you. Thank you. That is the opening for today's August 19th episode of the Dupuy Pinnacle Hip Litigation. And today's podcast is going to be just limited to one topic because it seems that every time I try to narrow down and answer one question on it, 5 more sprout up. So there's no way to just limit it in time or in scope. So today's topic is going to be the one that everybody seems to ask me besides who will lend them money right now on their case. And I went over that last episode, and I'm sure I will go over that again if things change. But in this, the other crucial issue that we raise is, how good is my attorney? Is he doing a good job? Reason that really is important is because the effect of that is we're actually asking, if I'd had a different attorney or a more effective attorney, would my case have already been settled? Or maybe a few people are going to be thinking, would I have gotten more money? Let's go into that now. We'll start off with the first issue of, just very briefly, for those people who have already settled, this really is not going to be a good discussion with you because what we've got on that topic is basically an attempt by the people to vitiate or to waive their own responsibility. If you settled your case, I have a very hard time being a attorney and having done many, many personal injury cases, I would say over 200, and certainly some medical malpractice cases. These are not being litigated as medical malpractice cases for reasons we'll go into another time. But they're similar to medical mal, and I know that nobody can make you settle your case. Clients frequently say, I really didn't have a choice. The attorney put pressure on me. I don't see how an attorney can do that. I can see how circumstances, situations, your bills coming up, the doctors sometimes even put pressure on you and say, gee, we gave you this treatment 6 years ago. We'd really like to be paid for it. We can't give you much more time. You're going to have to start making payments. Usually that's not true, but I've seen doctors' offices do it. And so there's a situation where you say, I settled the case and it's the attorney's fault that I settled it for less than it's worth. One, very few people are going to know if they've settled it for less than it's worth, because what it's worth is basically whatever it is that you got out of it. But the people who claim that I settled my case and I should have gotten more, that's not what today's podcast is for. Today's podcast is for those people that are still in litigation and have not gotten their offer of settlement from Dupuy, Johnson & Johnson. This is for those people who are waiting for any day for that big offer to come down the pike from the folks at the top of the pinnacle there. No pun intended. So, for those people that have not gotten an offer and who are still watching and hoping that the situations come together and they are offered X, Y, Z, so much money. This is today's podcast. Today's podcast is for you people. Now, is your attorney doing a good job? Well, first of all, the most important thing is two sides of the same coin. The first side is we want to know how much do you have in the way of what are called specials. Those are the bills. How much were your medical bills for treatment? How much were your medical bills for the operation of installing the Pinnacle hip implant? And of course, how about for all of that follow-up expense that you've incurred? And by that we mean, as I said a second ago, treatment, but also we want to know how much have you incurred in the way of having to get rides from places, whether you used Lyft or Uber or paid someone or managed to do your own driving, but you had to have help come along to make sure you didn't crash, or did you have to have a person who would help you and put your day's events together so that you could? Did you have a person who would help you organize your day? And did that cost you money so that they could help you to organize what had to be done that day, especially doctor's visits and things like that? Different states have different rules affecting, is that a recoverable expense? Is that part of your case that you have a right to seek reimbursement from Johnson & Johnson and Dupuy? So that's one of the issues that we have to look at first to determine, well, what are your expenses? How much do you have in lost wages, if any? Now, in my case, there's not a tremendous amount of lost wages because I was able to walk on this horrible, lousy thing that they put in my hip. It hurt, but luckily for me, it only hurt for 10, 15 minutes, and then the more I walked on it, the more the pain went away. So I don't have a lot of lost wages. I just got on there and I walked and I kept going, and I just absorbed the loss and said, I've got to keep working. So I don't have a tremendous amount of lost wages. But certainly one of the things I had to do that is to take pain medication. And as just, I'm sure like you and everybody else, I hesitate to say that. It's embarrassing to say that because you're always worried people are thinking, oh, sure you did. But I did. I found out over and over by trying to do without it that if I didn't take the pain medication, I was not in a position to go to work. It would hurt too much to get out of the car once I drove to where I was going. So we're all going to be looking at it to evaluate our case. We have to be looking at the expenses and loss of wages. And by expenses, we're going to be looking at were there other expenses that came out of your pocket that are not just part of medical expenses. So we take those, we put those together, and then importantly, we put that in the light of, well, what are you facing as a future? If you are one of those lucky people who has just managed to, by taking some pills that your doctor has given you, you found your way out of the horrible pain and crippling effects that you had received from this awful hip implant, well, then your future pain that you would be seeking compensation for is not going to be that high. You're not going to have a huge claim for future pain and suffering. On the other hand, if you're a person, let's just make one up, who has a limp that comes and goes due to the placement of the Dupuy pinnacle and of it being loose and it having caused that pain from the moment it was implanted, having been found by the doctors when they first looked at it, and then today, even 10 years later after the operation, it imposes the same pain in the same degree with the same frequency that it did from the first day on, well, there's no reason to assume that there's not going to be another 20 years of that pain. Unless somebody's going to say, well, if you got the revision surgery, you might avoid that. Well, that's a real slippery slope because the revision surgery is known for causing its own problems. And that person who we're talking about, that anonymous person, might say, no. I do not want to undergo revision surgery to get rid of the possibility of 20 years come and go hip pain, when in fact the revision surgery might cause me 20 years of daily pain, or even worse if the revision surgery is known for causing infections and having possibly crippling results. So either way, the person in that situation would be saying, hey, my claim has maybe 20 years or 30 years, depending on your age and your health, of future damages. So let's add that together. Okay, so when we add together the medical bills, the loss of wages, and the future losses, that gives us an idea of what our case involves financially. We call that our specials. And at that point, we should be able to ask our attorney, okay, based on that, what do you think this case is worth? In other words, if Johnson & Johnson and Dupuy came in with an offer of how much, at what point would you be telling me, hey, I think you should take it, that's a good offer? Well, very interesting way to look at it. There's many factors that can answer into it. You've probably heard that there is a general rule about 3 to 5 times of the specials is what we look at for a recovery. Very hard to actually put a lasso around that and say, well, since your specials, including future loss of wages, are $75,000, your case is therefore worth between $225,000 and $365,000. But if you have a insurance adjuster who's new, she's probably going to do something just like that and say, let's see, I'll get out my pen here, 5 times 75, I'll just offer him $350. Or they start low. They start with 3 and then go up. So that's how these things work. If that's how your attorney is doing the job, well, then there's nothing good or bad or nothing noteworthy about the way your attorney is handling it. But let's look at really the nuts and bolts of what should your attorney be doing. Well, your attorney by this time should have met with you 3, 4, 5 times. He should or she should know you and should have had a chance to go over this entire case with you and had a chance to meet you and maybe, some would say, maybe meet your family. Because that attorney should right now, not later, that attorney should already have done a sizing up of, well, what kind of witness do you make? Do you look good? Are you somebody we're going to throw into trial and the jury will like you? Are you somebody that's going to make a bad impression? Do you have a lot of tattoos? Those can turn off a jury real fast, and even if they don't turn the jury off, they definitely are a negative when it comes to seeking money. Juries award less money to people that have tattoos. So your attorney should have already met with you many times, let's say, 5 times, 10 times, to determine what kind of witness you make so your attorney can be already planning this case out. Is this one that should go to trial because you make such a great witness? Is this one that should not go to trial because you won't make a good witness? If your attorney has not met with you 3, 4, 5 times and your case is 3, 4, 5 years or more, something's very wrong. I don't admire the work that attorney is doing. I want to remind everybody, I mentioned this I think 2 episodes ago, that in my practice, and I'm not looking for or accepting, nor would I accept any cases from this litigation, but in my practice, I had a rule about reaching out and touching every personal injury client once a month. And that meant every client we had, once a month, we would find a way to communicate with them so that we could just tell them, hey, we're on your case, we are working on it, and don't think we've forgotten you. Well, that's a rule of thumb, and I think it's a great rule, but I'm willing to cock it all the way back and say, well, gee, if they've met with you 5 or 6 times in the last 5 years, well, that might be okay. Let's compare that to the attorney in my case, who I believe I've gotten 3 letters, and one of them was the initial, here's a questionnaire, fill this out, which was, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. And here's a questionnaire, fill it out, how were you injured, what are your injuries, etc., etc. Well, that's the sign of a lazy attorney who, instead of doing a thorough intake, which is what that attorney should do, meeting with you, going